Good morning.
Good morning. Oh gosh, I'm
Good
comfy.
morning. That's it. Get comfy.
Have you had a switcheroo?
I have.
You had such a
have.
switcheroo. I can see into your games bit.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And there's Bill.
Yep, see the cat.
Yeah. Wandering past. You'll probably see a good old cat fight going on soon.
Love it. Gosh, I'm sweaty in all sorts of places, and all I've done is try and put my headphones on.
It's a hard life, isn't it?
Wrangle, yeah, gosh.
Oh, my goodness. You guys wait until next week.
You've been working on something, haven't you? And I'm dead excited to hear it.
Do you know what? It was actually my first ever set of notes for the podcast.
Was it?
Yeah, I've had it stored away and I keep looking at it every time I go to do an episode. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, is now the time? Don't know. It's by far the worst one that I've done.
Was it?
Or it will be, yeah. It's hideous.
It's so strange to say that I'm excited to hear it.
I know. I know. I said the same thing to Claire. I was like, oh my God, this episode that I'm doing. You know, one of those episodes where you have to keep taking breaks and like watching Care Bears or something.
Oh yeah,
just like honestly, it's hideous, but it's going to be a two-parter.
Yep.
And I'm also going to release something just for the Blam. So there'll be a Blam episode that connects to the episode.
All right.
And yeah, it's going to come with a lot of trigger warnings.
Well, I am just as perplexed as everybody else listening because I've got no idea what it is or what's going on. So can't wait.
If you think of everything bad that can happen to a person and animals and everything.
Right.
It's got
I'd rather not have that hanging over me. I'll just wait.
Yeah. It's got everything. It's not like just in case, because if I'd heard this, I'd have freaked out and been like, well, I'm not listening to that. It's not directly like animal cruelty or anything like that. There's no like animals being killed or hurt or anything like that. It's just gonna have to wait and see. But yeah, it's tricky. It's put me in a bit of a funny headspace.
All right. Well,
it'll be good in a weird kind of way.
I've got something that will change your funny headspace because I've been dying to tell everybody this because I'm so proud of myself.
Go on.
So Josie and I went to London on the weekend and we went to see the Harry Potter Cursed Child show.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
How's that?
I won't discuss it because you need to see that for yourself. I don't want to give anything away.
Okay. But should I book tickets and see it?
I think everybody should witness it just to experience it because I mean it's like 5 hours worth of show.
Yeah.
It's two shows. Yeah,
I remember my friend telling me, because she said that she tried to book a ticket and you have to book like
2.
Yeah, you have to.
When you book the first show, it automatically books the second show, and there's 2 parts to it. But the story isn't about that. My story is about me. In the elevator when we was in on our way to London or whatever, we was in an elevator. I happened to notice the make of the elevator just on a little placard thing, and it was like something or other Schindler, and I instantly said, "Oh, Schindler's Lifts," and I fucking died. And I was so happy with myself for the rest of the day.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
I know. And that's carried me for like a week now that I've said
genius.
That. Schindler's Lifts.
Schindler's Lifts. Oh, that's brilliant.
No. And I was so happy with myself about it that I've been dying to tell everybody, just to tell the world how hilarious I am.
Oh, that's great. Schindler's Lifts. Goodness.
Yeah,
I've still never seen Schindler's List.
Oh, you should. I think that's another thing as well that everybody should see, just for the history of it, and that's definitely another thing. Yeah. Also, apologies now because I'm having watermelon for breakfast and I've cut the pieces a little bit too big. So you're going to have to witness me shoving massive chunks of watermelon in my mouth because it's too cold to bite with my teeth.
Nice.
There's my dilemma. Right. Random blams go.
Fuck. Actually, I've got one that I've just found that actually my sister, my oldest sister in America, would be able to confirm, I'm sure, because she is a genius. It says your brain is constantly eating itself. I would say the process and what it's called, but I feel that I might
Why is it doing that, please?
I might say a swear word. It says the process called something where cells envelop and consume smaller cells or molecules to remove them from the system. It isn't harmful, but it actually helps preserve your grey matter. Oh, so like the stupid cells get eliminated and replaced with bigger, smarter cells.
They don't. That ain't happening in my brain.
In most people. Not in ours. Not in ours.
No.
My brain's like, well, these little fellas are quite funny. They're quite amusing. Let's keep them around.
Cute, aren't they?
And then eventually they overtake all the other ones. All the ones that I learned in school and college are consumed by the little stupid ones that sing random tunes. Do you know what? I've had this song stuck in my head for months, and it's not like it's not a song. It's like it's a tune,
right?
And I'm pretty sure it's from like early 90s. Oh, but do you know what?
What's the tune?
That's the thing. I can't hum it or anything. I've just got this
an earworm.
Yeah, definite earworm. All my little cells are keeping it in there. All my little stupid fun ones.
That's just them buzzing. It's not a tune at all. They're just all like buzzing.
Yeah. Although on another note, I do hear random music. Like, and it's normally when I'm in a bit of a semi-sleep state. So like if I'm just sitting there chilling out, like before I go to sleep at night, I can hear, it's almost like old-timey music. And it's really distant and a little bit distorted. And I said this to someone I know that's very spiritual and that, and she said that could be like music from the other side, from different dimension. And I was like, oh. But I hear it a lot.
Oh goodness.
Not voices. I don't hear voices. Only Claire's.
Right. I've got a random blam for you.
Good.
And you're gonna have to try it out next time.
All right.
But people, so you know we say cheese when we're taking a picture, not just randomly. when we take a picture, people go cheers.
Yeah.
So that's to get you to smile.
Yeah.
So in the 1840s, it was considered very childish to smile when taking a photo. So they used to say prunes instead, so that you would keep your mouth closed. Can you imagine gathering around going prunes? Because that makes you look surprised.
Prunes. It makes you purse your lips, which is very, very today photos, isn't it?
That's we come full circle in things, don't we? Like vintage clothing comes back, so prunes is coming back.
I like to think that my fashion sense has never changed from when I was 4. So
I don't think it has.
No, it hasn't, definitely.
Do you wear Care Bear t-shirts?
I do. Love my Care Bear t-shirts. Care Bears, Wuzzles.
Right. Random blam's done.
Done. Morning.
Morning.
Morning, everyone. Welcome to episode 85.
Oh my goodness. So officially, we have released over 100 episodes.
We have.
So there are over 100 episodes now that people can listen to, but obviously some of them are the blams and you do need to subscribe to get access to those. But yeah, that's crazy.
Sense of achievement.
Yep.
Yeah, that's awesome. You think we'd be professionals by now, wouldn't you, with over 100 episodes? But nah.
No.
We have learned nothing.
No, I'm still... Although I don't yawn as much. That's one thing. I don't yawn as much now because I'm not actively going through cancer treatment, so I'm quite
got no excuse.
Exhausted. I am just a very sleepy person.
I do try and stifle my yawns because we do have like full-on lives. So I think, although it is unprofessional from our listeners, from one person.
I think if I try and stifle a yawn, it comes out somewhere else. Like my eyes go moop.
Yeah, well, mine are like that anyway, so I'm right. But I do notice that sometimes I think I can't stifle this anymore, it's going to come out. So I end up like getting my jumper and going like that. But then you can see it in my face because I go.
I know. You turn into like this scream mask, didn't you?
I can't yawn.
Yeah, you can't really stifle a yawn. But anyways, so today's episode doesn't really give away what it is in the title, but it is quite a serious topic. So
what is the title?
The Woman Who Wasn't There.
Oh.
Did you not read the message that I sent you?
No.
All right, cool. So today's story is a topic that is quite sensitive and may affect some of our listeners, so caution is advised. This story contains some details about the 9/11 attacks.
Oh no.
But it isn't about what happened during 9/11, although I will touch on what happened, but it's about what happened afterwards. In the aftermath of 9/11, miraculous stories from survivors started to emerge. And today I'm going to tell you about one such story in particular. So this is the story of Tania Head. And Tania's story starts smack bang in the middle of her life. And it's like something out of a fairy tale. In her late 20s, on a cold, dreary day in February 1999, while standing outside the World Trade Center trying to flag down a taxi, it was pouring down with rain. And she took all of 30 seconds to try and untangle her umbrella and try and erect it to get out of the rain, when a man jumped ahead of her and tried to get in the taxi that she'd just hailed.
Oh, rude.
So, understandably, Tania was very upset and she decided to let this man know. And in the midst of her shouting at him about this taxi stealing business, he introduced himself as Dave, and he apologised for stealing the cab and he let her have it, but on one condition. She had to promise to call him. So he handed her his business card and then he let her get in the cab. But Tania never did call Dave. She just Dave got pushed to the back of her mind and she forgot all about him until a few weeks later when they met outside the towers again. And this time, Dave invited her for a coffee and Tania agreed. And they hit it off right away. It was the longest coffee date ever. I think they was out for about 3 hours. And they spent those 3 hours just talking about everything and nothing. And they very quickly fell very deeply in love with each other over the coming months.
Aww.
They lived very far apart. So they was often commuting. They commuted to the World Trade Centers to work and they often commuted to see each other. So Tania says they were like the same person and they would finish each other's sentences. They knew what the other person was thinking. They were very, very similar in who they were. Dave was very kind and thoughtful, and Tania said he would do anything for anyone. He volunteered at homeless shelters, and then he would come home upset and, say to Tania, I can't believe people have to live like this. And, he was just very generous. He would give money to the homeless He once gave money to a homeless man, only to find out that this man wasn't homeless at all. He kind of just took the money and kind of scammed him in a sense. But Dave's opinion was that he would rather have given that money and risk the dishonesty than not give that money in case it was genuinely in need.
Yeah.
And Tania and Dave moved into a luxurious apartment in Manhattan together and eventually got a golden retriever puppy that they named Elvis.
Aww.
In the spring of 2001, Dave proposed to Tania, and it was a beautifully romantic proposal in their favourite restaurant at the very top of the World Trade Centers. And she hastily said yes, and they planned a date for October of that year to get married. But Dave didn't want to wait that long.
I came home from work, and what I found was rose petals leading from the door to our dining room. And I followed the rose petals, and I found Dave standing there with a coconut bra and a grass skirt, dancing to Hawaiian songs. And I was like, oh my God. And he had even cooked this really disgusting Hawaiian food recipe that he had found on the internet. And on the dining table were two tickets to Hawaii, leaving the next day.
So while they were on their trip in Hawaii, they had an unofficial romantic beach wedding. And the couple joked to their friends and family that they had gotten married and not married. That's so corny. Like, it's a really cheesy love story.
Yeah.
The couple had this perfect life. Tania had actually grown up in Spain, in Barcelona, and had always dreamed of having this American life. And now she was living it. She'd graduated with a degree from Harvard University and a graduate business degree from Stanford University. She had a high-paying job at Merrill Lynch, and now a soon-to-be husband to the man of her dreams. Just before 8:30 a.m. on September the 11th, Tania gets a call from her fiancé, Dave. And he asks her if she wants to go and get a coffee before he starts. But Tania declined. She said she had an early start and was just literally about to go into a meeting. She said, "I love you. I'll talk to you later," and then hung up the phone. She'd been working for Merrill Lynch, helping to close a big merger on the 96th floor of the South Tower, when she saw the first plane hit the North Tower, where her fiancé, Dave, worked as a consultant at Deloitte & Touche. She felt the impact from the other tower and looked around in confusion with everybody else, and then she saw that the North Tower was on fire. Dave worked on the 100th floor, so she immediately began counting down the windows from the top floor. Dave's floor was completely obliterated, but she didn't know it yet. But that was the first of two planes that had just slammed into the North Tower, hitting floors 93 to 99. She watched in horror as the building was consumed by the explosion. She saw tiny specks of something falling out of the building before she realized that it was people. People jumping out of the burning building to what surely would have been their death. In her haste to save her husband, she ran down 18 flights of stairs to the 78th floor where the express elevators were. And these elevators were huge elevators that could carry 55 people, like maximum, down to the ground in under 60 seconds. But she wasn't the only one waiting for the lift. Hordes of people from the higher floors had flocked to the elevators in an attempt to get down and get to safety. Tania remembers hearing one man shout, "Ladies, this is not the Titanic. It's not women and children first." Before she was able to get into the lift and out of the building to safety, she remembers hearing vividly a woman screaming that there was another plane coming. Moments later, the second plane hit the South Tower, striking floors 77 to 85, directly where Tania and hundreds of other people were gathered. On impact, the air was sucked out of her lungs and she flew backwards, slamming into the marble wall. She felt immense heat coming from the tons of jet fuel that spread red-hot fire throughout the floor. And under the smoke and rubble, she began to crawl. Bodies of dead people were littered all around her. People were screaming and clambering over one another. Her secretary, who moments before had been holding her hand, was now lying on the floor, decapitated.
Oh.
As she crawled, she noticed that her right arm wasn't working as it should. And she looked down and saw that it was hanging partially off at the elbow, held on by only a small strand of sinew. A man grabbed at her partially severed arm, begging her for help. But Tania screamed. She was worried that he was going to tear her arm off.
Oh, God.
And the man was on fire, and he was begging her. He held out his hand. And instead of it being like a grasping hand for her to take it, Tania noticed that he was actually holding a wedding band in his hand. And he asked Tania to please find his wife and give it to her. Tania took the ring, and inside was his wife's first name and the message, forever. She tucked it safely away and continued trying to crawl to safety. With thoughts of her upcoming wedding to Dave in her mind, she needed to make it out alive. But she didn't make it far before she passed out. Moments later, Tania was awakened by a pounding on her back, and it took her a few seconds to realise she was on fire. Her back and her right arm were covered in flames. She described being able to smell her own skin burning.
Ugh.
The pounding on her back was coming from a man that was trying to put the flames out. And she looked round in a daze and saw the man behind her, his face covered by a red bandana. This man became known as the man in the red bandana before he was later identified as Wells Crowther. He saved 18 lives that day with his selfless actions, including Tania's. When the plane hit the tower and he was uninjured, he acted on instinct. He wrapped the red bandana that he always carried with him around his face to shield himself from the smoke and began trying to help injured people down the only remaining exit stairs of the building. He carried one woman on his shoulders down 17 flights of stairs and went back into the burning building 3 times. So when he came upon Tania, he guided her to the stairs before leaving her and going back for others. Tania then descended as quickly as she could amongst the other survivors, making it to the 20th floor before collapsing. An emergency worker found her, scooped her up and carried her outside. And once outside, the fireman set her down on her feet. She took in a big lungful of fresh air and turned to look at the building. The devastation was unreal. There was noise everywhere. But soon it wasn't just noise. She felt a low rumble at her feet that grew steadily louder. The building had begun to collapse.
Oh, God.
Right underneath the building, the firemen threw Tania to the ground and rolled her underneath the fire truck, where he shielded her body with his. The truck and the firefighter protected her from the falling debris, but buried her under a mound of rubble, and she shared the oxygen tank with the firefighter until eventually they were both rescued. Tania Head was one of only 19 survivors that made it out of the South Tower that had been located on or above where the plane had crashed. Her story of survival became one of the most harrowing and well-known amongst other survivors. She would wake up in hospital 5 days later, confined to a wheelchair that she couldn't operate with her horribly disfigured and burnt arm. Tania would remain in the hospital until Thanksgiving 2 months later, and it was there in the hospital that she found out that her beloved fiancé Dave had been killed. Like everyone in the aftermath of 9/11, Tania struggled to cope. Not only had she lost the love of her life, she had lost her way of life. But as time went on, Tania began to channel her anger and guilt into helping other survivors like her. She set up a charity in Dave's name called Dave's Children Foundation and was its executive director. She kept her promise to the dying man that had given her his wedding ring, and she tracked down his wife and gave it to her. But she still struggled every day with the loss of Dave and her own injuries. And in the wake of the disaster, survivors had banded together to form different support groups where they could share their feelings and experiences with people that understood. And in May 2003, Tania went online and logged into a support group for survivors and victims' families. She spent a lot of time online, reading other people's experiences, what the families of the victims were going through, and she offered them support and advice, but didn't feel comfortable in sharing her own story. Like many of the survivors on the forum, she didn't feel justified feeling how they did as survivors. They didn't feel like they were able to share their guilt over surviving when they were considered the lucky ones. Most didn't feel comfortable sharing their horror stories out of respect for the families that were on forum. They didn't want them to know what their loved ones had witnessed before they died. And this included Tania. She as a survivor also needed support. They all did. So Tania discussed with some of the other survivors the idea of creating their own group for survivors only. And in October of that year, Tania created the World Trade Center Survivors Forum. Members logged in straight away. They were able to freely discuss their own stories without shame or guilt. They were seen and not overshadowed. And it was here that Tania began to relay all the horrific details of her survival. Not only was she a survivor, but she had also lost someone that she loved in the attack. And members very soon began to view Tania as an inspiration. She'd been through so much, but still managed to see the positives in life. She was infectious. She was a very big personality. She turned this negative into a purpose and used that purpose to help other survivors. Members said that Tania taught them to live life with grace and courage. The horrendous sense of guilt that people felt for surviving had left many members with questions.
Some of my coworkers have families, they have little kids, and they died and I didn't. So why? Why am I special? Why was I spared? Why didn't they make it? Why did I make it? Was it God? Was it fate? Is it because we have something to do? Was it because we were shielded by the elevator machinery? It just makes you go crazy. You go crazy asking yourself why?
And Tania gave them that sense of purpose. As word got out about this online support group, another survivor, Jerry Bogas, who had escaped the North Tower, had founded the World Trade Center Survivors Network, which was an in-person support group for survivors. And he'd heard that there was another group online headed by Tania. So he reached out to her. And after some email correspondence, I think it was about 2 months, the two groups decided to merge under the World Trade Center Survivor Network in 2003. Tania very quickly became the powerhouse for this group, rallying for survivors, organising meetings, scheduling speakers at survivor events and then hosting them, even getting the group recognised as a non-profit organisation and then securing funding. She called in leading trauma experts to give speeches and provide counselling for people. And she actually often paid for these expenses out of her own pocket if funding wasn't available. And at a time when only family members of victims were allowed inside Ground Zero, and for those that don't know, Ground Zero is the name of the area where the Twin Towers stood. They call it Ground Zero just as a name for a disaster that has happened to that area. So at a time when only family members were actually allowed inside Ground Zero, Tania petitioned to allow survivors to also be allowed inside. Having only been allowed on the outskirts before with everybody else, they felt that being inside that area where they had escaped would give them almost a sense of closure or a sense of healing. Tania soon started guided tours of Ground Zero. She and some of the other members gave their time daily to escort tourists around the area and give them a detailed rundown of what happened that day, and then their own stories of survival, what they'd been through in the aftermath. She even led high-profile visitors, including Mayor Michael R. Bloomberg, former Mayor Rudolph W. Giuliani, and former Governor George E. Pataki. She was featured in different 9/11 articles as a representative of the 20,000 surviving victims who'd escaped the 9/11 attack. She'd become the celebrity survivor. In 2004, she travelled to Thailand in the aftermath of the tsunami to help survivors, and then to Louisiana in 2005 after the devastation of Hurricane Katrina. She was hailed as an inspirational woman by the Survivors Network and many more. While giving a tour of Ground Zero in 2006, Tania caught the attention of a family friend of the Crowthers. Her story of the man in the red bandana saving her was one that they hadn't come across yet. So immediately after 9/11, many survivors started to emerge with stories about this man in the red bandana. And when his body was finally uncovered in March 2002 and his identity was revealed, his family then went round to each of these survivors and spoke to them, got their story of how their son had saved their life. The New York Times as well had also interviewed all these survivors. The man in the red bandana, there's a lot. Wells Crowther was an inspiration. So there's a lot about him. So the New York Times had also known about him and interviewed all of the survivors. But they hadn't come across Tania's story. So they were desperate to meet her and to get her account of what happened. The Crowther family asked to meet Tania also, and she eventually agreed to meet them, but she wanted to do it in private. She didn't want the New York Times there. It was a very personal experience for her, and she was happy to share it with Wells's family.
Yeah.
So they met at a restaurant, and Tania spoke of how courageous Wells had been, how through the smoke and fire, Wells had instructed anyone that could stand to stand, and then to make their way to the stairs. And then if they could help anyone, then they should. She told them that Wells had come to find her, and she'd begged him not to leave her. And he'd said, "I won't. Don't worry. I'll get you down." And that's exactly what he did. And during the dinner, Tania told the Crowthers that she had kept her burnt clothing from that day, and she said that she would send a piece of it on a plaque to the family, as it was one of the last things that their son had touched when he'd put the flames out on her back. They were so captivated by Tania that they invited her to a memorial service that they were going to have in Wells' honour, where they'd commissioned a phoenix statue in his honour, and then asked Tania to give a speech to everyone detailing Wells's actions. And she attended the meeting with a close friend, Linda, who she had met during the survivors group. And when it came time to give her speech, Tania was so overcome with grief for herself, for her family, for Wells, and that she couldn't read her speech. So she actually asked Linda to do it. So Linda read this speech, and it's incredibly emotive. It's incredibly impactful, and I couldn't find the speech anywhere to kind of read out segments of it, but she commended Wells on how courageous he was. The New York Times, like I said, were very interested to speak to Tania as well about what she'd been through. But Tania continuously refused to speak to them. Or she did speak to them and set up a meeting, but then she would cancel the meeting, and she never replied to emails. And after the 5th anniversary of 9/11 in 2006, the New York Times decided to get in touch with Tania's acquaintances to get the information secondhand, because Tania wasn't willing to give it herself. So Tania's response to this was to send out a mass email amongst the Survivors Network saying, "These reporters are out to get me. Please don't share any information about me publicly." But Jerry Bogas, who was the founder of the in-person one, said that if the New York Times wants to speak to me and ask me questions, then I'm going to answer them honestly.
Yeah.
See, Jerry had also begun asking Tania some questions of his own. He'd grown suspicious of her because of some discrepancies in her story. Sometimes she would claim that she was working at Merrill Lynch on September the 11th. Other times she said that she was working for Morgan Stanley. Sometimes she would refer to Dave as her husband, and other times as her fiancé. But Tania said that she'd actually gone to the courts after Dave's death in order to be able to marry him posthumously. So therefore making him her husband and making her essentially a widow. But it was soon after this that members of the Survivors Network started to lose confidence in Jerry. They said that he wasn't acting on their behalf and that he didn't have the survivors' best interest at heart. And at the next board election for this Survivors Network, he actually lost his bid for re-election. And in his place, Tania was voted in and then given a new title of president of the World Trade Center Survivors Network. So she now headed this Survivors Network. She now called the shots. She started working with authors in order to write a book. She also got in touch with the director about making a documentary about her survival and the survival of the other members. But the New York Times didn't give up. They wanted to speak to Tania. They'd interviewed every other survivor above or on the point of impact, and they wanted her story. The more they hounded her, the more Tania became increasingly angry and frustrated. She frantically told the other members that they were bombarding her, they were harassing her, they were asking her questions that were just too painful. And members couldn't understand why she didn't just tell them the truth of what happened. Or if it was too painful for her, then they would quite happily tell the story on her behalf. And it wasn't long before Tania confided in another member the real reason that she didn't want to give the interview to the New York Times. She disclosed that she, in fact, wasn't an American citizen. But the other members didn't think that that would matter. It didn't matter to them. But they said to her, why don't you go and speak to a lawyer just in case? So Tania visited the lawyer with a friend of hers. And while they was at the lawyer's office, Tania began to relay a very different version of events to the lawyer than what she had done to the other members. Tania and Dave were in fact not married and had only known each other a matter of weeks. Tania didn't work for Merrill Lynch, but was actually only in the building to apply for an internship. In absolute disbelief, this other member that had gone with her very hurriedly started contacting other members of the group. And they all actually confided that they too had been having some doubts about Tania and her story. One member said that her severely burnt arm didn't look burnt at all, but more like it had lots of patchy skin grafts. But they didn't want to bring it up. Nobody wants to be the person to question someone's survival story. Other members said that they found it strange that she was just so happy all the time. Because although she was very positive, she had a very positive outlook on life, they knew themselves that the effects of 9/11, it affected them massively. Some days they just couldn't be happy no matter how hard they tried. But nobody wanted to be the person to confront that. So they just stood back and admired her. You know, like I say, she was the celebrity survivor. A week after the meeting with the lawyer, the New York Times had done some digging of their own and had released an article titled, "In a 9/11 Survival Tale, the pieces just don't fit." Because the New York Times had looked up Tania's husband, Dave. They found many articles on him. He had in fact been killed in the attack, and he'd been a very popular, well-loved man. There were many commemorative articles about him, but in every single one, there was no mention of Tania. Dave's family had never heard of Tania, and they hadn't heard of a wedding in Hawaii. The New York Times also got in touch with Tania's previous employer, Merrill Lynch. They had zero record of an employee by that name. What? They got in touch with Harvard and Stanford universities where Tania had gotten her degrees. But like Merrill Lynch, they also had no record of Tania Head. And that's because Tania Head hadn't been to Harvard or Stanford University. She hadn't been married to Dave. She hadn't worked for Merrill Lynch, and she hadn't been in the South Tower when the plane hit. She hadn't even been in America on September the 11th, 2001.
What?
Because Tania Head was actually Alicia Estevez Head, a Spanish woman that had been attending classes in Barcelona at that time and had only travelled to America for the first time in 2003. Alicia had grown up in a very wealthy household, but it was clear from her family and friends that she had a penchant for lying. She often fabricated many boyfriends and fiancés, and she boasted about her life and how intelligent she was. She was the best at everything. As a teenager, she was involved in a horrific accident that did actually leave her arm partially severed, and she had these horrible scars to show for it. But even this accident was embellished. It became a story of how her fiancé had tragically died in the accident also. So for reasons unknown to everybody, Alicia had come to America in 2003 and concocted this harrowing story. Her knowledge of what happened that day would rival historians. She had thoroughly researched the layout of the Twin Towers, what companies were on what floors, even down to the mystery man in the red bandana.
Oh
Wells's family were obviously heartbroken to have been betrayed by this woman, because he was a massive, he saved 18 people. He was a hero. He died, tragically lost his life saving all of these people, and then to be used like that in someone else's narrative, they were just absolutely devastated. And they never did obviously receive any of this burnt clothing that Tania had promised them. And for the real survivors of 9/11, they were left utterly confused and bewildered, because Tania Head had been an activist. She had done wonderful things for the other survivors, but it was all based on a lie. And if she was lying, then so too could others. Who could they trust now that they couldn't corroborate anybody else's story? They had lost that trust and that faith that they had in humans, I guess. And there were other stories that came out of after the 9/11 attacks, these harrowing survival tales of how people had survived and then been horrifically disfigured or and then they couldn't work, so they lost their houses and they lost these things, and then people would get money, set up charities and try and do good things, but actually it was all based on a lie and it was all scammed. So most people actually profited from these false made up stories, but that wasn't the case for Tania. She never profited from her lie at all. If anything, she was left out of pocket because she would invest her own money into the Survivors Network. And after the New York Times expose came out, Alicia disappeared. The Survivors Network removed her as president, and the director that she'd enlisted to make a documentary about her did make a documentary about her, but it was a very different one to what it started out as. The documentary is called The Woman Who Wasn't There, and it's where I've got most of this information from. Members of the network, the Survivors Network, did actually receive an anonymous email a few years later from a Spanish account saying that Tania Head had committed suicide. But that actually, again, was a lie, because she was last spotted in New York a few days after the 10th anniversary in 2011. But she hasn't been seen or heard from since.
Not surprised.
But I think people still believe that she's in America. She didn't go back to Spain or anything. She's still wandering about.
Well, she's probably got a whole new identity now.
Yeah, but she still looks the same.
Yeah.
But all of that information about her survival and the wedding ring and all that information came from her own mouth. None of that is embellishment on my behalf. That's all her own story that she has told. Everything about Dave, again, is an embellishment on my behalf. That's all. Everything that she said to everybody.
I mean, it's kind of sad in a way, isn't it? That like she felt that she had to sort of create this whole background story and get sympathy and all that. But I'm disgusted at it at the same time.
Absolutely.
You know, I feel bad for her, but I'm also like disgusted by her.
She started going through this thing called flooding, and it was a therapy technique, and this her best friend that she'd made from the Survivors Network was called Linda, and Linda would come with her when she did this flooding technique, and it was basically Tania telling, like, she'd recorded her story on a recording device. And every single detail about this horrific story she'd recorded on this device, and then she would have to listen to it over and over and over. And Linda was there at the same time, you know, consoling her and everything. But Linda said, I've got my own story and I've got my own horrors. And actually, I started to take on Tania's as well. And it started to affect me. I started to have nightmares about Tania's survival story. So she actually said to Tania, I'm really sorry, but I can't come with you to this anymore because it's affecting me too much.
Yeah.
And Tania began to, like, really, really say to her, you know, you're a terrible friend. How can you not support me in this? And she was very nasty and very vindictive as well. So she affected so many people by what she'd done that I can't imagine surviving something like that in the first place, and then having this tale to tell, and then confiding in people. This is what I went through. This is how I feel. And I'll wake up every night, you know, but actually that person's gone, I know how you feel because this is my story.
Yeah.
When actually it wasn't. She's got no idea how any of those people felt.
No.
Every year she would go to the anniversary and she would lay a little taxi cab down in Dave's honor because of how they supposedly first met, of getting into the taxi. But it was just, people said that she must have believed her own story because
I suppose she would have done, like, eventually, wouldn't she? Like, if you tell yourself something enough times, you start
convinced
to believe
herself that it was real. Absolutely.
Yeah. Bloody hell.
There were times when she was giving this interview for this documentary and she's talking about Dave and she's starting to get upset about it. People began to suspect that when they went to her house and the dog was never there, and they was like, oh, where's Elvis? And she was like, oh, he's out on a dog walk. They began to suspect things about her life that weren't true. She never showed pictures of Dave, and she never told anything about Dave's family or going to the anniversary. She was never with Dave's family there. And even to have picked a person, she must have gone through the all of the victims and just picked her favorite one. Oh, he looks like, because she'd done so much research about him. He was a genuine person that died in the attack, and she knew where he worked. And
to even like give his family like the thought of he had this almost like secret life that he didn't feel that he could share with us, that's hurtful.
Yeah, it's just it's a very I will never understand how people can do something like that. But in the wake of any tragedy, there is always these sorts of stories that come up, and it's shocking
people
that
trying
somebody
to gain
can
from it.
Yeah, somebody can benefit from something. She never went to Thailand to help with after the tsunami. She never went to Louisiana to help after Katrina. Those were all lies that she told everybody.
Hideous.
Just to make out that she was this wonderful person.
Yeah, I mean, if you feel like that, just be a wonderful person.
Absolutely. If you want recognition for doing good, then do good.
Do good. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Oh, hideous. Yeah. Do you know one of my favourite sayings? And I thought of you when I was hearing it the other day, and I've heard it many times, and I thought, do you know what? That is such a good saying. It's such a good outlook on life. You know, when people say, in a world where you can be anything, be kind.
Yeah.
And it made me think of you, and I thought, do you know what? You've had a lot of like smacks to the face, and like things that other people would get quite sort of bitter and twisted about, and you've had a lot of battles and things like that, but you're still just such a good person, and you're so nice and you're so kind. And I think when I hear that, I do think of you, and I think, it's such a true saying. Like, anyone can be anything they want.
It takes nothing. It costs nothing.
Yeah. To just be, just fucking be nice.
And even if it does cost you something, like if it does cost you a bit of time out of your day, that's one day, and it just matters so much to somebody else, the things that you do, and
it can make such a big difference. And it's all relative, isn't it? It's like, if I see someone that's, that looks homeless, or, they look like they're struggling a little bit, I'll go over, I'll look in my wallet, and I think, okay, what have I got in there? And then I almost like reason it to myself. And I think, because Claire always goes, what? Don't keep giving people like big chunks of money. Do you know what I mean? Because if I've got like £20 note or something, I'll go over there and I'll give it to them. Because in my head, I think, realistically, how is that 20 quid going to change my life? Unless it's my only 20 quid and I need to go and get like fuel so that I can get to work, or I need to get food or something like that. I do look at it and I think, how much is this 20 quid going to change my life? How much of a difference is it going to make to that person? That 20 quid becomes more valuable to them than it does to me.
Yeah.
So I think, right. And it's not selfless, because it makes me feel good.
Yeah. It's like on Friends, where Phoebe's trying to
she
prove
lets
to
herself
Joey
get
that
stung.
there's a selfless act. Yeah.
The bee probably died, right? What? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I just will never be able to understand how somebody can do something like that. And that's why this case is so perplexing to me. And
super perplexing.
Yeah. I wanted to do something that wasn't murder and
well, that's coming next week.
Yeah. All right, well, I can't wait.
Brilliant. Oh, thanks for that. That was surprising. I didn't know where it was going, because I kind of forgot the title of it. So I was thinking, like, it's going to be a story of like this woman's tragic events that happened on 9/11. But no.
You weren't there.
No, she weren't there.
She weren't even there.
Bitch.
All right, well, I will see you on the next one.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Sarah. See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
There's nothing that she could ever say to me today or going forward that will ever change the pain and the anger. And I'm sorry, but the hatred that I have for that woman right now.
If you have enjoyed listening to our episodes, make sure you rate us and leave us a review on whatever platform you are listening.
We absolutely love hearing from you guys. So you can also help support our show by donating to our Buy Me a Coffee link. We will make sure that you get a massive shout out and a big thank you in our next week's episode.
You can also follow us on social media at Perplexed Podcasts. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and if you want to see more videos and blooper reels, subscribe to our TikTok and YouTube channels.
You can also email us your stories at perplexedpodcasts@gmail.com.
and you can find all the relevant links in the episode descriptions. Thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye.
I'm going to very quickly eat my watermelon because that's not attractive for anybody to see.
Fucking hell.